Welcome back to Froggy French, where we dive into the most captivating and twisted stories from the depths of the internet. Today we're exploring 9 absolutely mind-bending Reddit stories that will make you question everything from family secrets to workplace drama and neighborhood mysteries. These tales of betrayal, deception, and shocking revelations will keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these wild stories, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. I think my boyfriend is secretly controlling what I watch on Netflix. So I've been with my boyfriend Mark for about 8 months now, and something really weird has been happening with my Netflix account. I'm 24, he's 27, and we live in different apartments but spend most weekends together. Usually at my place in Portland. About 3 months ago, I started noticing that shows would appear in my continue watching list that I had never watched. At first, I thought maybe I had clicked on something by accident, or maybe my little sister had used my account when she visited. But then it kept happening. Shows like action movies and true crime documentaries that I honestly have zero interest in. I asked Mark about it casually one evening in late September when we were deciding what to watch. He just shrugged and said maybe Netflix's algorithm was acting up. I believed him at the time because, honestly, who would lie about something like that? But last week, something really creepy happened. I was at work, it was around 2:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, and I got a notification on my phone that someone was watching Netflix on my account. I was obviously at my desk, and Mark was supposed to be at his job at the hardware store. I called him, and he said he was on his lunch break and decided to watch something at home on his own account. The thing is, when I checked later that evening, there was a new episode of some reality dating show in my recently watched that I would never, ever watch. When I confronted Mark about it, he got really defensive and said maybe someone had hacked my account. He suggested I change my password, which I did. But here's where it gets even weirder. Yesterday I was cleaning my apartment and found a small notebook tucked between my couch cushions. It had lists of TV shows and movies with little notes next to them, like, she turned this off after 10 minutes, or watched 2 episodes, seemed bored. The handwriting looked like Mark's, but I'm not completely sure because I don't see his writing that often. Maybe I'm overreacting, but this feels really invasive. I mean, if he wants to know what I like watching, he could just ask me. I haven't confronted him about the notebook yet because I'm not even sure it's his. And I don't want to start a huge fight over something that might be innocent. My friend Sarah thinks I'm being paranoid, but my coworker Lisa said this sounds like controlling behavior. I'm really confused because Mark is usually sweet and considerate. He brings me coffee in the mornings when he stays over and always asks what I want to order for dinner. Should I confront him directly about the notebook, or am I making a big deal out of nothing? Wow, this is actually really unsettling when you think about it. Like, the fact that he's not just watching your Netflix but actually taking notes about your reactions is next level creepy. I had an ex who used to go through my browser history, and it started with small things like this too. The whole thing about lying when you called him at work is a major red flag. Trust your gut on this one, because people who respect boundaries don't secretly monitor their partner's entertainment habits. I definitely have that conversation about the notebook, even if it feels awkward. Well, let's hope the next one is less complicated. My parents have been faking family vacations for 10 years to keep me from meeting my grandmother. This is going to sound absolutely insane, but I just found out that my parents have been lying to me about our family vacations for basically my entire adult life. I'm 31 now, and this whole thing started when I was around 20. Every summer since college, my parents would plan these elaborate family trips. We'd go to places like Lake Tahoe, Yellowstone, or the Grand Canyon. Always somewhere that required a lot of driving and was far from our hometown in Ohio. My dad would book everything, handle all the logistics, and insist that we needed to disconnect from technology during these trips. I never questioned it because the vacations were actually really nice. We'd stay in decent hotels, eat at local restaurants, do touristy things. My mom seemed to enjoy herself, and my dad was always in a great mood. It became our annual tradition, and I honestly looked forward to these trips. But 3 weeks ago, my great-aunt Patricia called me out of the blue. She's my dad's aunt, and I hadn't heard from her in probably 5 years. She was calling to tell me that my grandmother on my dad's side, who I thought had died when I was in college, was actually still alive and living in a nursing home about 2 hours from where I live now. I was completely shocked. I have clear memories of going to what I thought was her funeral when I was 20. I remember the service, the flowers, the whole thing. When I called my parents to ask about Aunt Patricia's call, my mom started crying and my dad got really quiet. It turns out that my grandmother didn't die. She had developed dementia around the time I graduated college, and my dad decided he didn't want me to see her in that condition. The funeral I remember was actually for my great-uncle on my mom's side, who I barely knew. I guess in my memory, I just mixed up the details. The vacation thing is where it gets really weird. Apparently, every summer when we'd go on these trips, it was specifically timed to coincide with family gatherings that my grandmother would attend. My dad's siblings would all get together with their kids and grandkids, and my parents would make sure we were conveniently out of town. My dad said he was trying to protect me from the pain of seeing my grandmother deteriorate. He knew how close we were when I was younger. She used to babysit me every weekend and taught me how to bake her famous chocolate chip cookies. He thought it would be easier if I just remembered her the way she was. I understand his reasoning, I guess, but I feel like I've been robbed of 10 years of visits with my grandmother. She might not recognize me now, but maybe she would have earlier on. Maybe I could have made some good memories with her even after the dementia started. My mom says she went along with it because my dad was so adamant, but she always felt guilty about it. She's the one who would suggest destinations that were far away to make sure we couldn't accidentally run into family. I don't know if I should be angry or grateful. Part of me appreciates that they were trying to spare me pain, but another part of me feels like they made a huge decision about my relationship with my grandmother without even asking me. Am I wrong to feel betrayed by this? Or should I be understanding about their intentions? Oh my God, this is heartbreaking on so many levels. I can't imagine how confusing and overwhelming it must be to find out something like this. While I understand your dad's intentions, the fact that they kept this up for 10 whole years is just mind-blowing. They literally coordinated fake vacations to avoid family gatherings. That's some serious commitment to a lie. I think you have every right to feel betrayed, even if their hearts were in the right place. The thing that gets me is that they took away your choice completely. Moving on to another tricky situation. My boss gives me the worst assignments because I look like her ex-husband. I've been working at this marketing firm in Chicago for about 2 years now, and I've always wondered why my boss Michelle seems to have it out for me. I'm 28, been in marketing for about 5 years, and generally get along well with coworkers and clients. But Michelle, who's the creative director and probably around 40, has always treated me differently than everyone else on the team. At first I thought maybe it was because I was new, or maybe my work wasn't up to par. But even after I started getting positive feedback from clients and other departments, Michelle would still assign me the most tedious projects. While my coworkers got to work on fun campaigns for restaurants and local businesses, I'd get stuck with things like updating spreadsheets for the accounting firm or writing copy for the law office's website redesign. It's not that the work was beneath me exactly, but it was boring and didn't really use my skills. I have a background in social media and digital campaigns, but Michelle kept giving me traditional print work that honestly felt like busy work. I started to wonder if she was trying to push me to quit. The situation got even weirder about 6 months ago when we hired this new guy, Jake. He's around my age, similar experience level, but Michelle immediately started giving him interesting projects. His first week, she had him working on a campaign for this trendy new coffee shop downtown. Meanwhile, I was proofreading brochures for a dental practice. I mentioned this to my coworker Amanda during lunch one day in October, and she gave me this strange look. She said she'd noticed the pattern too, but wasn't sure if she should say anything. Apparently, some of the other women in the office had been talking about it. Then last week, we had our company holiday party at this restaurant near the office. Michelle had a few drinks, which was unusual because she's normally pretty professional and reserved. I was standing near the bar when she approached me, and she seemed kind of emotional. She started talking about how difficult it must be to work with someone who reminds you of painful memories. I honestly had no idea what she was talking about, so I just listened. Then she mentioned that I have the same eyes and facial structure as someone who hurt her very badly a few years ago. It didn't click immediately. But the next Monday, Amanda pulled me aside and explained what she thought was happening. Apparently, Michelle went through a really messy divorce about 3 years ago. Amanda had worked with Michelle at her previous job and knew some of the details. Michelle's ex-husband was apparently emotionally abusive and left her for someone much younger. Amanda showed me Michelle's Facebook page, which still has some old photos from before the divorce. When I saw the pictures of Michelle's ex-husband, I understood immediately. We don't look exactly alike, but there are definitely similarities. Same brown hair, same general build, and apparently the same piercing blue eyes that Michelle had mentioned. I feel terrible for Michelle, and I understand that divorce can be traumatic. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair that my career is suffering because of something that has nothing to do with me. I've been applying for other jobs, but the market is tough right now, and I really need this position. Maybe I'm wrong to feel frustrated about this, since Michelle is dealing with her own emotional issues. I don't know if I should try to talk to her about it or just keep my head down and do the work. Am I being unreasonable to want fair treatment at work, or should I be more understanding about her situation? This is such a difficult situation because you can feel bad for your boss, while also recognizing that what she's doing is completely unprofessional. Personal trauma doesn't excuse workplace discrimination, and that's essentially what this is. The fact that she basically admitted to treating you differently because of your appearance is actually pretty serious from a legal standpoint. I think you need to document everything and maybe speak to HR if your company has one. You deserve to advance in your career regardless of who you happen to resemble. Moving on to another tricky situation, I just learned I'm not actually allergic to cats after 30 years of believing I was. This is probably going to sound ridiculous, but I just discovered that my entire life has been based on a lie my parents told me when I was a kid. I'm 30 years old, and up until last week, I genuinely believed I was severely allergic to cats. Growing up, whenever the topic of pets came up, my parents would always say, "Oh, we can't have cats because of your allergy." I have clear memories of being around 6 or 7 and begging for a kitten, and my mom explaining that cats would make me sick. She'd say things like, "Remember how you sneezed when we visited Aunt Carol?" Or, "Your eyes got watery at the pet store that one time." I never questioned it because, honestly, why would parents lie about something like that? Throughout my childhood and teenage years, I just accepted that cats were off limits. When friends had cats, I'd politely decline invitations to hang out at their houses, or I'd take allergy medicine preemptively if I absolutely had to go. Even in college and afterward, this supposed allergy influenced my decisions. I couldn't date people who had cats. I had to be careful about apartments I rented. I'd avoid cat cafes and pet stores. It became this fundamental fact about myself that I never thought to verify. Last month, my girlfriend Emma and I were talking about maybe moving in together, and she mentioned that she'd always wanted a cat but understood that my allergies made it impossible. She seemed really disappointed, and I started feeling guilty about limiting her happiness because of my medical condition, so I decided to get properly tested. I made an appointment with an allergist, explained my history, and asked for a comprehensive allergy panel. The doctor seemed a little surprised that I'd never been formally diagnosed, especially with such a severe reaction. But she was happy to run the tests. The results came back completely negative for cat allergies. Not even a mild sensitivity. The doctor said I could probably roll around in a room full of cats with no problem. She asked about other environmental allergies I might have, and it turns out I do have mild reactions to certain types of pollen and dust mites, but nothing related to cats at all. I was so confused that I asked her to run the test again, thinking maybe there was a mistake. Same results. No cat allergy whatsoever. When I confronted my parents about this over dinner last Sunday, they looked extremely uncomfortable. After a lot of awkward silence, my dad finally admitted that they'd made up the cat allergy because they simply didn't want pets in the house. Apparently, when I was little, I was constantly asking for animals. First it was a dog, then cats, then hamsters, birds, basically any pet I could think of. My parents didn't want the responsibility or the mess or the expense, but they didn't know how to explain that to a 6-year-old, so they decided to tell me I was allergic to the most common pet I kept asking about. They figured it would be easier than constantly saying no and dealing with tantrums. What started as a white lie to avoid getting a kitten somehow became this established family fact that lasted for over 20 years. My mom said she felt terrible about it, but didn't know how to bring up the truth as I got older. She worried that if she admitted they'd lied, I'd question everything else they'd ever told me. My dad seemed less apologetic and more defensive, saying that lots of parents have to make difficult decisions about pets. I understand that raising kids is complicated and that parents sometimes have to make tough choices. But I feel like this lie affected major decisions in my adult life. I missed out on relationships, living situations, and experiences because I thought I had a medical condition that doesn't exist. Maybe I'm being too dramatic about this, since ultimately it's just about pets. But I can't help feeling like my parents robbed me of 30 years of potential cat companionship over something as simple as not wanting to clean a litter box. Should I be more understanding about their parenting decision? Or is this as deceptive as it feels to me? This is honestly kind of hilarious and heartbreaking at the same time. Like, I can understand not wanting pets when you have young kids, but keeping up the lie for 30 years is pretty intense. The fact that it affected your dating life and living situations makes it so much worse than just a little white lie. At least now you can finally get that cat you always wanted. I bet Emma is going to be thrilled when you tell her. Moving on to another tricky situation. I exposed my landlord for illegally living in his own rental property. I've been renting this small house in Austin for about 18 months now, and my landlord Gary has always been kind of sketchy. He's probably in his mid-40s, always seems stressed about money, and has this habit of showing up unannounced to check on things around the property. The rent is decent for the area, around $1,200 a month, which is probably why I overlooked some of the red flags early on. The lease seemed normal, Gary seemed legitimate, and the house was in good condition when I moved in. But over the past year, I started noticing weird things. Sometimes I'd come home from work, and there would be evidence that someone had been in the house. Not like anything was stolen or disturbed, just small signs. The thermostat would be set to a different temperature, or there'd be a coffee mug in the sink that I didn't remember using. I brought this up with Gary a few times, and he'd always have an explanation. He said he'd been checking the HVAC system, or that he'd used the kitchen sink to fill up a bucket while doing yard work. It seemed plausible, even if it was annoying that he wasn't giving me proper notice before entering. Things got really strange about 6 months ago when I started working from home more often. I'd hear noises from the basement during the day, like footsteps or water running. When I asked Gary about it, he said he was doing maintenance work and storage organization down there. He showed me how to access the basement and said I was welcome to use it for storage too. But when I went down there, it looked less like storage and more like someone was living there. There was a mattress in the corner, a small refrigerator, and what looked like personal belongings scattered around. When I asked Gary about it, he said his contractor sometimes stayed overnight when doing big projects. Last month, I was feeling sick and stayed home from work on a Tuesday. Around 10 in the morning, I heard someone moving around upstairs, which was weird because Gary usually only came by on weekends. I went to investigate and found Gary in my kitchen, making coffee and eating what looked like leftover pizza from my refrigerator. He seemed really startled to see me and explained that he'd gotten confused about my work schedule. He said he'd been having some personal issues and sometimes used the house to clear his head when he thought I wouldn't be home. He apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again. Multiple times. I started keeping track, and Gary was entering the house at least twice a week, usually during normal work hours. He'd use the shower, eat food from my kitchen, and basically treat the place like it was his home. 2. I finally got fed up and did some research about tenant rights in Texas. I also started looking into Gary's background and discovered some interesting things. It turns out that the address he'd given me as his primary residence on the lease doesn't actually exist. The property tax records showed that he owned several rental properties around the city, but none of them were listed as his homestead. That's when I realized that Gary was probably homeless, or at least didn't have a legal place to live, and was essentially squatting in my rental house. Whenever I wasn't home, I contacted a tenant rights organization and learned that what Gary was doing was not only a violation of my lease, but also potentially illegal. If he was living in the property without declaring it as his primary residence, he could be avoiding taxes and violating city housing codes. So I filed complaints with the City Housing Authority, the tax assessor's office, and also contacted local news because I thought other renters should know about this kind of scam. The story ended up getting picked up by a local TV station, and within a week, Gary was facing multiple fines and investigations. He had to find legitimate housing and stop entering my rental property without permission. I felt vindicated, but also a little guilty. Gary clearly has financial problems, and maybe I should have tried to work something out with him instead of going public with the whole situation. Am I wrong for exposing Gary instead of trying to handle this privately? Or was this the right way to protect my rights as a tenant? Honestly, you did exactly what you should have done. The guy was literally living in your house without permission and eating your food. That goes way beyond landlord problems into straight up creepy territory. Plus, if he's doing this to you, he's probably doing it to other tenants too. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions, and tax evasion isn't exactly a minor issue. You protected yourself and potentially other renters. Moving on to another tricky situation, my future mother-in-law secretly changed our entire wedding menu the morning of our ceremony. I got married 3 weeks ago, and I'm still processing what happened on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My husband Jake and I had been planning this wedding for over a year, and his mother Linda had been heavily involved in the process, which I thought was sweet at first. Linda is one of those people who has very strong opinions about everything, especially food. She's always commenting on what people eat, making suggestions about restaurants, and she has this whole philosophy about proper cuisine. But she seemed supportive of our wedding plans, even when we chose a menu that wasn't exactly her style. Jake and I decided to have our reception at this lovely venue outside of Sacramento. We spent months working with their catering team to create a menu that reflected both of our backgrounds. I'm half Mexican, so we wanted some traditional dishes from my culture, and Jake loves Italian food, so we incorporated that too. We planned to serve things like carnitas tacos, chicken marsala, and a variety of sides that would appeal to everyone. The final menu cost us about $4,000, which was a significant portion of our budget, but we felt it was important to have food that represented who we are as a couple. We did multiple tastings, confirmed everything with the venue coordinator, and felt really good about our choices. Linda had made a few comments about the menu over the months leading up to the wedding. She'd say things like, "I hope your guests are adventurous eaters," or "Some people might not be familiar with that type of food," but she never directly objected. And we thought she'd accepted our decisions. The morning of our wedding, I was getting ready at the hotel with my bridesmaids when the venue coordinator called me around 10:30. She sounded confused and apologetic and explained that there had been a last-minute change to our catering order. Apparently, Linda had contacted the venue at 8 that morning, claiming that Jake and I had decided to completely change the menu due to dietary concerns among the guests. She provided what she said was an updated list, approved by both of us, featuring much more traditional American food. Instead of our carefully planned Mexican and Italian dishes, the new menu was things like grilled chicken breast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The venue coordinator said they were scrambling to accommodate the changes, but wanted to confirm with me since it was such a major switch so close to the event. I was absolutely stunned. I told her that we had never authorized any changes and that Linda had no authority to modify our catering order. But here's the problem. It was literally the morning of our wedding. The ceremony was starting at 4, and guests were already traveling to the venue. The catering staff said they could try to prepare our original menu, but it would be rushed, and they couldn't guarantee the quality would be up to their usual standards. I was crying in my wedding dress, trying to figure out what to do. My maid of honor suggested we just go with Linda's changes to avoid any disasters with the food service. I didn't want to risk having terrible food at my own wedding, so I reluctantly agreed to the modified menu. The reception ended up being fine, I guess. The food was bland but edible, and most guests didn't know there had been any changes, but I felt robbed of this thing that had been really important to me. I wanted to share my cultural background with Jake's family and our friends, and instead we ended up with the most generic wedding food imaginable. When I confronted Linda about it the day after our honeymoon, she acted like she'd done us a favor. She said she'd heard from several relatives that they were worried about exotic food at the wedding, and she thought it would be better to play it safe. She insisted that she was just trying to make sure everyone would be comfortable and well-fed. Jake is caught in the middle of all this. He's upset with his mother for going behind our backs, but he also doesn't want to create a permanent rift in the family. He thinks we should just let it go and move on, since the wedding is over and everyone had a good time overall. But I can't let it go. This wasn't just about food preferences, it was about respect and boundaries. Linda made a major decision about our wedding without consulting us, and she essentially erased an important part of my identity from our celebration. Maybe I should be grateful that Linda was trying to help, even if her methods were wrong. But I feel like she stole something from our special day that we can never get back. Am I being too sensitive about this? Or is my anger justified? This is absolutely infuriating, and you have every right to be angry. She didn't just change your menu, she literally erased your cultural identity from your own wedding day. The fact that she waited until the morning of the ceremony when you'd have no choice but to go along with it makes it so much worse. This isn't about being helpful, this is about control, and probably some underlying prejudice about your background. Jake needs to step up here and set some serious boundaries with his mother. Moving on to another tricky situation. Strange things keep happening in my apartment, and I finally discovered the disturbing truth. I've been living in this apartment in Minneapolis for about 7 months now, and for the past few months, the weirdest things have been happening. I'm starting to question my own sanity, but I think I finally figured out what's been going on. It started small. I'd come home from work and find my keys in a different spot than where I left them. Or I'd wake up and my coffee mug would be in the dishwasher, even though I was sure I'd left it on the counter. At first, I just assumed I was being forgetful, or that I'd moved things without thinking about it. But then it got more noticeable. Books would be rearranged on my shelf, my bathroom towel would be folded differently, and sometimes my TV would be on a different channel than what I'd been watching the night before. I started to wonder if I was developing some kind of memory problem or maybe sleepwalking. The really strange part was that nothing was ever missing or damaged. It wasn't like someone was breaking in to steal things. It was more like someone was living in my space and then trying to put everything back the way they found it, but not quite getting it right. About 6 weeks ago, I found a half-eaten sandwich in my refrigerator that I definitely didn't make. It was turkey and Swiss on wheat bread, which isn't even the type of sandwich I would normally eat. I prefer ham and cheese on white bread. When I asked my girlfriend if she'd left it there, she reminded me that she's been vegetarian for 3 years. That's when I started getting really paranoid. I began taking photos of my apartment before I left for work, just to see if I could document any changes. Sure enough, things would be slightly different when I got home. A pillow moved from one end of the couch to the other, or my desk chair adjusted to a different height. I considered installing security cameras, but they're expensive, and I wasn't even sure what I was trying to catch. Instead, I decided to try a different approach. Last week, I pretended to leave for work as usual, but actually parked around the corner and waited. After about an hour, I snuck back to my building and used the emergency stairwell to get to my floor without being seen in the main hallway. When I quietly opened my apartment door, I could hear someone moving around in my kitchen. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I forced myself to investigate. What I found was my upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who's probably in her 70s, sitting at my kitchen table, eating what looked like my leftover Chinese food. She seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see her. At first, she started apologizing in broken English, saying she was confused and thought this was her apartment. But that didn't make sense because her apartment is directly above mine, and the layouts are completely different. After we both calmed down, Mrs. Chen explained the real situation. Apparently, she'd been struggling financially since her husband passed away last year. Her social security isn't enough to cover all her expenses, and she'd been skipping meals to save money on groceries. She said she'd noticed that I often threw away perfectly good leftovers, and she started sneaking into my apartment when I was at work to eat the food I was going to discard anyway. She'd been using some kind of tool to get through my door lock, which honestly scared me a little. Mrs. Chen promised she was only taking food that looked like it was going to be thrown out, and she tried to clean up after herself so I wouldn't notice. She said she never intended to frighten me or make me think I was going crazy. I felt terrible for her situation, but also violated that she'd been entering my private space without permission for months. She could have just asked me for help, or we could have worked out some kind of arrangement where I'd save leftovers for her. At the same time, I understand that pride can make it hard for people to ask for assistance, especially older people who are used to being independent. Mrs. Chen seemed genuinely ashamed and apologetic. About the whole thing, I ended up giving her my phone number and telling her that if she ever needs food, she should just text me instead of breaking into my apartment. I also helped her apply for some local food assistance programs that she didn't know existed, but I still feel uncomfortable knowing that she was in my space so many times without my knowledge. I've started locking my door with the deadbolt in addition to the regular lock, and I'm considering moving when my lease is up. Am I being too harsh by wanting to move, or is this situation as weird as it feels to me? This is such a complicated situation because you want to feel bad for Mrs. Chen, but she was literally breaking into your apartment for months. That's terrifying regardless of her reasons. The fact that you thought you were losing your mind makes it even worse. It's great that you're helping her find proper resources, but I totally understand wanting to move. You should feel safe in your own home, and it would be really hard to relax knowing someone had been coming and going without permission. Well, that wraps up these 9 rather intense stories. Thanks so much for sticking with us through all 9 of these absolutely wild stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales in the comments below. Which one shocked you the most? If you have your own crazy story you'd like to share, check out the Google form link in the description where you can submit it completely anonymously. We read through every submission, and the best ones might just make it into a future video for everyone to hear. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already for more incredible stories like these. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.